In the hush of a spring dawn in 1623, a sound ripped through the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace. It was sharp, raw, and unmistakably human. Not the groan of a wounded soldier, not the plea of a condemned man. It was the scream of a girl, only 15 years old. Princess Fatma Sultan, daughter of the most powerful ruler on earth. Her cry sliced through stone and silence alike. Even the eunuchs stationed at the palace gates froze where they stood, terror rooting them in place. This was a moment no one was allowed to witness, no one permitted to interrupt. What happened that morning was not a private family tragedy. It was the exposure of a hidden cost, one every daughter of a sultan was forced to pay. A cost etched into flesh, mind, and soul. A truth buried for 6 centuries. Fatma's screams did not come from physical wounds. They rose from something far older and far crueler. A ritual, an ancient practice that broke the spirit long before it ever touched the body. A system that condemned Ottoman princesses to lives of silence before they ever reached womanhood. For over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire preserved a form of matrimonial preparation so refined, so calculated, that even its fiercest enemies would not have wished it upon their own daughters. It was carefully erased from official chronicles, concealed behind gilded walls and embroidered tapestries. Only in 2019 did fragments of it resurface, uncovered in sealed archives in Istanbul, medical notes, coded reports, forbidden correspondences. Across Europe and beyond, women dreamed of the fate of an Ottoman princess. Silk robes, jewels heavy with pearls, servants at every step. But behind those glowing walls waited something else entirely. A nightmare so overwhelming that many young girls prayed for death rather than face their wedding night. This is not a fairy tale. It is a horror story disguised as imperial ceremony. And to understand it, we must first understand the world that created it. The Ottoman Empire stretched like a shoreless sea, ruling from 1299 to 1922. Its armies thundered across 3 continents, from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Yemen. In 1453, Constantinople fell, and the city, reborn as Istanbul, became the empire's beating heart. At its center stood Topkapi Palace, a labyrinth of power where empires were shaped and lives quietly undone. Behind its walls existed a world sealed off from time, the imperial harem. At its height, it housed more than 800 women. It was a universe of silk and surveillance, where every breath was watched and every gesture carried consequence. Silence was currency. Obedience was survival. In 1530, when Suleiman the Magnificent granted the title of Haseki Sultan to Hurrem, the harem ceased to be merely a place of pleasure. It became a battlefield, an arena of alliances, rivalries, and invisible wars. Most women there were concubines, often Christian girls captured or purchased from distant lands. They arrived in chains, yet paradoxically, many possessed more freedom than the Sultan's own daughters. These concubines were educated in music, poetry, embroidery, and etiquette. They dreamed of catching the Sultan's eye, of rising from slavery to power. Some succeeded beyond imagination. During the era historians call the Sultanate of Women, figures like Kösem Sultan and Turhan Hatice. Sultan ruled from behind the veil, shaping wars and policy with iron resolve. But while concubines climbed, the princesses of royal blood descended into something darker. Born into splendor, they were never free. From their first breath, their lives belonged to the empire. They were political instruments, human seals used to bind alliances, reward loyalty, and pacify dangerous men. Their marriages were never about affection. they were acts of state. Princess Fatma Sultan was born in 1606, the daughter of Sultan Ahmed I and Kosum Sultan herself, the woman who would one day rule the empire from the shadows. Fatma's childhood appeared charmed. She wandered perfumed gardens, studied astronomy, and read Arabic and Persian manuscripts. Scholars praised her intellect. Chroniclers admired her beauty. She mastered 4 languages. Her calligraphy rivaled trained scribes. She debated scholars on history, law, and geography. She dreamed of the stars and tried to understand their hidden order. But none of it mattered. Her fate had been sealed long before her talents emerged. She was promised in marriage not as a woman, but as a token. The man chosen for her was Damat Kara Mustafa Pasha, a hardened military commander nearly 20 years her senior. Loyal to the throne, proven in war against Persia, the marriage would elevate him further. For Fatma, it marked the beginning of her undoing. 3 months before the wedding, she was taken into a process feared by every royal daughter, Terbiye ve Mubarak, the so-called sacred education. This ritual existed only for princesses. It was the product of centuries of psychological engineering, designed to strip away royal pride and reshape a girl into an instrument of obedience. Overseeing Fatma's preparation was Gulnar Hatun, a woman hardened by 60 winters and the training of more than a dozen princesses before her. Under her authority, Fatma was led into the Angelino Dairesi, the bride's chamber. Though adorned with Persian carpets and ebony panels, it was not a sanctuary. It was a prison dressed in beauty. From dawn until noon each day, Fatma endured endless rituals of submission. She learned 18 distinct forms of bowing, how to greet, how to serve, how to wait, how to lower herself in silence. Even her walk was regulated. Through Yurush and Ses, she was taught to move in measured steps, head tilted precisely 30 degrees, hands never rising above her heart. Each correction erased a piece of her identity. The princess was slowly remade into a shadow. Her speech suffered next. Her vocabulary was reduced to just 43 approved words: gratitude, acceptance, apology, humble request. Any deviation was punished with fasting, isolation, or public humiliation before the harem. Independent thought became dangerous. Her obedience was tested before a tribunal of women and eunuchs, presided over by none other than her mother, Kosum Sultan. In that chamber, Fatma was no longer a daughter. She was an asset being evaluated. Yet the most disturbing part of her preparation waited beneath the palace. In underground chambers, replicas of bridal rooms had been constructed. There, Fatma was subjected to talim and gurdak, rehearsals of the first night. Wax mannequins, crafted by Venetian artisans with anatomical precision, stood in for a future she did not choose. Instructors issued commands no child should hear, let alone obey. Her reactions were recorded in secret ledgers. Tears, resistance, fear, everything was measured. The more she resisted, the harsher the conditioning became. Slowly, the girl who once gazed at the stars retreated inward. By the time she was transferred to the Galan Kushku, the bride's pavilion. A week before the wedding, the transformation was nearly complete. The pavilion was sealed from the outside world. Sound could not escape. Neither could she. Every detail of her existence was controlled. Her diet consisted of prescribed foods: pomegranates, honey, almonds, goat's milk, rare spices from Yemen. Even her baths were regulated. Daily purification rituals with oils of valerian, poppy, and orange blossom. These elixirs, prepared by alchemists trained in Cordoba and Samarkand, carried hidden purposes. Some calmed the body, others dulled resistance. A few induced a floating detachment from the self. The walls were draped with tapestries depicting ideal wives, obedient, fertile, eternally rewarded for submission. Venetian mirrors lined the chamber, forcing Fatma to watch herself constantly. This practice, muraqaba, once a Sufi exercise of reflection, became a weapon. She learned to police even her thoughts. In this prison of silk and glass, Fatma finally understood the truth. She no longer belonged to herself, and the ceremony had not yet begun. By the time Princess Fatma Sultan reached the final days before her wedding, the girl who once debated scholars and mapped the stars had nearly vanished. What remained was a body trained to comply and a mind conditioned to retreat. The preparation had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had not simply broken her. It had erased her. The appointed day arrived on March 15th, 1623. From the first light of dawn, Istanbul pulsed with celebration. Streets overflowed with processions, incense hung thick in the air, and music echoed from every quarter. Inside Topkapı Palace, banquet tables groaned beneath golden platters. Dancers from Persia and Andalusia performed. Musicians sang of conquest and divine favor. Janissaries displayed their strength before the Sultan. To the people, it was paradise on earth. To Fatma, it was the opening of a sentence she could not escape. Chroniclers noted that while guests laughed and feasted, the princess sat in silence. Her lips were dry, her gaze unfocused. Palace physicians recorded symptoms they could not fully explain: trembling, cold sweats despite the mild March air, shallow breathing so severe they feared her heart would fail. She could not eat. She could barely speak. The spectacle outside gleamed with splendor. Inside her, terror expanded like a living thing. When the final cup was raised and the crowds dispersed, the most feared procession began. Fatma was escorted through the palace gardens toward the nuptial pavilion, a structure designed centuries earlier under Mehmed the Conqueror himself. Octagonal in shape and rising across 3 levels, it was not merely a building, it was a ritual made of stone. Each level served a purpose: purification, submission, consummation. Nothing about its architecture was accidental. Corridors narrowed where fear was meant to grow. Chambers widened where surrender was expected. Every step was designed to reduce resistance and magnify vulnerability. The first level, Taja, was devoted to purification. Here, Fatma underwent hours of ritual bathing in marble tubs filled with rose water, sandalwood essence, and ambergris imported from Somalia. Alchemists applied ointments mixed with diluted opium, mandrake extract, and compounds whose formulas were known only to palace physicians. These substances induced calm, passivity, and in some cases, a dreamlike euphoria. Medical notes described her condition as a missionary trance, the body yielding while the soul remained locked in silent protest. From there, she was led upward to the second level, Teslim Katı, the floor of surrender. Here, Fatma was dressed in her bridal garments. At first glance, the gown was magnificent. White silk embroidered with gold thread, pearls from the Persian Gulf sewn into the fabric. But beneath its beauty lay design with darker intent. Hidden cords and clasps allowed attendants to restrain her if needed. The weight of her crown forced her posture rigid. Anklets and bracelets limited her stride. Thick-soled shoes slowed her steps. The dress was not just ceremonial, it was a cage stitched from luxury. While Fatma was being transformed into a living symbol of obedience, her future husband prepared elsewhere in the palace. Kara Mustafa Pasha was surrounded by counselors and veteran warriors. He was instructed not in tenderness, but in control. He was taught phrases meant to intimidate, tones meant to humiliate, and methods of physical dominance tailored specifically for a princess of imperial blood. This was not left to chance. Every detail was calculated to ensure authority and erase hesitation. Finally, Fatma was guided to the third and final level, Sif Katu, the Chamber of Consummation. Its walls were covered with tapestries depicting military victories, cities in flames, armies in retreat, captive princes and princesses kneeling in defeat. The symbolism was deliberate. Victory in war mirrored domination in marriage. Conquest was the language of power, whether on the battlefield or in the marriage bed. The furniture itself reinforced control. Beds concealed hidden cords. Cushions were soaked in calming oils. Lighting was designed to blur edges, soften resistance, and disorient the senses. This was where Fatma faced the night she had feared since childhood. When the doors closed behind the final attendants, she was left alone with her husband. Imperial medical records describe what followed as a complete collapse of the spirit. After months of conditioning, Fatma could no longer respond coherently. Her body shook uncontrollably. Her voice faded into barely audible murmurs. Her eyes drifted as if fixed on something far beyond the room. Physicians later named this state sakma, total shock. At first, Kara Mustafa Pasha interpreted her condition as defiance. Believing arrogance lay beneath her silence, he employed the techniques he had been taught. Controlled intimidation, calculated gestures of dominance, carefully measured physical contact. But there was no resistance to overcome. There was only absence. Fatma's mind had retreated completely. In an act of psychological survival, her consciousness fractured, slipping into deep dissociation. It was as if her soul had abandoned her body to endure what remained. When the consummation finally occurred, after hours of failed attempts, it was recorded by hidden observers as traumatic for both. Persian-coded medical documents described internal bleeding, repeated fainting, and a condition physicians called ruh sukmesi, the departure of the soul. From that night forward, Princess Fatma Sultan was never the same. In the days that followed, even the harshest instructors of the harem were alarmed. Fatma developed selective mutism, speaking only in whispers and only when directly addressed. Her appetite vanished entirely, forcing attendants to feed her by hand. Without warning, she would collapse into hours of uncontrollable weeping. Most disturbing of all was what chroniclers referred to as the sickness of fear. The mere presence of a man, even trusted eunuchs, triggered violent panic. Her breathing would quicken. Her skin grew clammy. She fainted repeatedly. Palace physicians diagnosed her with what they termed virginal melancholy, a condition they considered common among imperial brides. In modern terms, it was irreversible trauma. They tried everything they knew: herbal infusions, music therapy, Sufi spiritual exercises meant to realign the soul. Nothing restored her vitality. The brilliant girl who once debated scholars and mapped the heavens was gone. Her books gathered dust. Her instruments lay untouched. The gardens where she once walked with curiosity and joy fell silent. The daughter of the most powerful sultan on earth had become a ghost. Her marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha continued in form, but not in spirit. There were children, ceremonial appearances, carefully staged displays of normality. But behind closed doors, silence ruled. Later memoirs suggest Mustafa sought refuge in endless military campaigns and opium, attempting to drown the guilt of being an instrument in a system that destroyed her. Fatma lived like this for 29 more years. She became a figure of duty, a mother by obligation, a wife without a voice. In 1652, she died at the age of 46. Official records cited brain fever as the cause, yet the date of her death fell on the anniversary of her wedding. Few in the court believed that was coincidence. But Fatma Sultan's tragedy did not end with her. It was only one reflection in a much larger mirror. Fatma Sultan's fate was not an anomaly. It was a pattern, one repeated quietly across generations of Ottoman princesses, hidden behind ceremony and silence. Palace records uncovered centuries later revealed dozens of royal daughters who endured the same rituals, the same psychological destruction, the same erasure of self. Some were left marked by permanent mutism, others descended into madness. A few attempted escape through death itself, and some simply vanished from the chronicles altogether, as if they had never existed. The machinery of empire was meticulous. What could not be erased outright was softened into euphemism, disguised as illness, or buried beneath ornate language in official documents. Yet the truth survived. It lingered in coded medical notes, in forbidden correspondences, in whispered testimonies passed between women who were never meant to speak. These fragments slept in the shadows of archives until modern scholars began to piece them together. Recent translations reveal that not all princesses submitted without resistance. Some, despite years of conditioning, fought back in the only ways they could. There are records of royal daughters who faked their own deaths to avoid a second marriage. Others devised secret systems of symbols and coded phrases to communicate with sisters silenced by the same rituals. And a rare few, with unimaginable courage, petitioned the Sultan directly for divorce, an act so dangerous it challenged the very foundation of imperial authority. These stories remind us of something crucial. Even in systems built on total control, resistance can survive. Even women raised to surrender found ways to whisper no into enforced silence. Fatma Sultan's story exposes an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power does not always protect those closest to it. Often, it consumes them first. While the world imagined Ottoman princesses as radiant figures wrapped in luxury, their reality was one of invisible chains. A system of rituals so finely tuned that human lives were sacrificed to preserve political stability and male ambition. In popular imagination, the harem became a place of intrigue, perfume, and silk. But it was also a theater of fear, a place where tears were swallowed, voices extinguished, and spirits methodically broken. The stories of princesses passed down through centuries were not romantic legends. They were political constructions, narratives that devoured the daughters of the Sultan themselves. And this raises an unsettling question. How many other truths remain buried in the archives of ancient palaces? What rituals were hidden within the courts of Europe, Russia, or China? What prices did women pay to uphold dynasties, crowns, and alliances? How many lives were reshaped or destroyed in the name of stability? Fatma Sultan's tragedy is not merely a footnote in Ottoman history. It is a warning. It shows how easily power transforms its own children into offerings, how splendor and ceremony often rest upon foundations of suffering that history prefers to forget. For centuries, official chroniclers worked carefully to erase these realities. They painted the harem as a world of refinement and grace. They wrote of jewels, music, and poetry, rarely of fear or despair. But beneath their words, another narrative pulsed, one preserved in marginal notes, medical diagnoses, and documents never meant to be read. It was a story of young women silenced, of identities stripped away, of lives rewritten by ritual. The scream that echoed through Topkapi Palace in 1623 was not the only one. It was simply the one that left enough trace for us to hear today. To know Fatma Sultan's story is to strip away history's mask. It forces us to confront the human cost, hidden behind palaces and crowns. It reminds us that power, no matter how dazzling, is rarely as golden as it appears. And it leaves us with a final question. How many voices are still buried beneath the weight of ceremony, waiting for someone to listen? Because until we confront these truths, history remains incomplete, not a record of humanity, but a polished illusion. And only by listening to the silenced can we begin to understand what was truly sacrificed in the name of power.